above the ground. So you can imagine Eve coming down here as it's over there. Well, it's not proper. So seller has a problem. The seller has to fix this problem. The seller wanted to remove the eavesdropping, but that wasn't such a good idea. Well, usually what we do, and lawyers will do this, is we will have to prepare something called an encroachment agreement, or sometimes something called a relaxation agreement, which is basically an agreement by the neighbor, or it could be from the city, if it's going on to city properties, whereby both owners say it's okay for the eave to be over the property line. We have the job to do that. For you as a buyer, we have to check to see there's not those problems. And if there is those problems, we have to get them fixed. And we don't like having to do that, but that's what we have to do, and it's our obligation, because when you think about it, if we don't do it and get it fixed for you as the buyer before you own this place, 5 years down the road, when you go to sell it, the buyer at that time is going to be saying, what about that eavesdropping? You know, then it'll be up to you to fix it, and then you'll come back to us as a lawyer and say, well, why didn't you tell me about that? So, you know, our job is to fix it, and our job is to fix it see it's fixed from your point of view, but also, we also have an obligation to make sure things are correct for the mortgage company. The mortgage company is not interested in lending money on a house that turns out to be 3 feet over onto the neighbor's yard. So we'd want to discover that. And you as a buyer probably wouldn't want to be buying a house at that point, right? So at that point, worst case scenario is you end up not buying the place because there's a problem that shows up on a real property plate. Never happened in any of my deals yet, so it's not hopefully never will. So we solve those problems. Other buyers' issues from a legal perspective that we look after and check for you is we're checking for payment and then adjusting city property taxes. You buy a house March 1st, the city property taxes are a calendar year thing, but unless you're paying it monthly, they're not really due until June 30th. So let's say June 30th, $3,000 of city property taxes are due, but you're not buying it on March 1st. The seller hasn't paid for January and February. He hasn't paid his share of property taxes, so we make sure those get adjusted. So really what happens is you get a credit for about, whatever it works out to, $500 on your purchase price to pay for, to allocate the seller's taxes. There's also some special issues often for condo purchases. The other thing I'm sure realtors hate and lawyers hate is there's problems at condos, right? You buy your little condo, and that condo can be fantastic, but guess what? The roof of the whole complex has got some problems, or there's a leaky, you've probably heard of leaky condos, and lo and behold, it's 2 weeks before possession date, and much to everybody's chagrin, the condo board sent out a letter to everybody saying, we are imposing a $10,000 special assessment to fix the whole building needs to be fixed for the fact that it leaks. So if that lands in our lap, I'm sure it's happened to you a few times, and it happened to me. It's happening to me on a deal. It's coming up. It's closing February 17th, and the notice came out for an assessment to be paid February 15th. So bad news for the seller, because they have to pay a big special assessment that they probably weren't too happy about, but that's the way it works out. But we have to look after those sorts of things. Pardon me?
If they have insurance, they will cover it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Loss assessment we cover it.
Hopefully, yeah. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. These people don't. So we look out for those sorts of things, but that's something that lawyers will look for. And there's other issues if you're buying a property that is already rented. For example, are you going to take over the tenant? If so, there has to be an allocation for, perhaps you buy it halfway in the month, you have to allocate the rent. You might have to allocate the fact that the tenant had a damage deposit. So those sorts of financial issues, we figure them all out for you. Okay? Next slide, payment and closing. What we do after we deal with all of these issues that we've been talking about and some others is we calculate how much money you, the buyer, has to bring in to basically pay everything, including, of course, mainly the seller. So we will phone you up and say, well, the amount we need to bring in is $23,400, and that will look after all of these little things that might end up small adjustments like city taxes or rentals, damage deposits, all those sorts of things. And we calculate that, we tell you what to bring in. We move the money from our office over to the seller's lawyers. And you know, we're in trust. Basically, when it's usually the morning that you're moving in, because we move in usually at about noon, we're busy. We've collected all of your money that you brought in. We've collected the money from the mortgage company, and we are moving that over to the seller's lawyer to pay for it so that you can actually move in at noon. But we move it over to the seller's lawyer and we ensure that there's proper trust conditions. And the main one always is the seller can't just turn around and give the $500,000 to his client. Instead, the seller's lawyer has to use some of that to pay off the seller's mortgage, right? We don't trust that the seller, if he gets the $500,000 check in his pocket, is gonna go and pay off the $300,000 Scotia mortgage, right? So it's up to us to make sure that happens by putting the seller's lawyer under what's called a trust condition, that he has to take the $300,000 out of the $500,000, pay off the Scotia mortgage, right? So by doing that, we're protecting that situation to make sure you'll never get stuck with a problem of the seller's mortgage not having been paid off. That's a very important concept of what we do for you. We have a role in ensuring that possession occurs on time, and that goes hand in hand usually with handling any holdups and transferring of the cash, and basically getting you moved in on time. As you know, the odd time there's a problem, perhaps the money's slow coming from the bank, or there's some small issue that comes up whereby things aren't going to be completed right on 12 noon on the date of closing, on the move-in date. And basically, when that happens, probably 1 in 50 times, but when it happens, basically your buyer's lawyer's office will be jumping through hoops to get some extra documents signed to make sure that you can move in anyway. And basically, we get you moved in as a tenant if there's been for example, a holdup of the money at the bank or something like that. So we never want you to be in the situation of having a moving truck out front of a house at 12 o'clock noon, and because you're ready to move in, and because the bank or there's been some holdup at land titles to register things, whatever it is, things aren't ready to go, and we don't want you saying, okay, well, send the moving truck back to the warehouse and you go by the hotel. So we will do things for you if those problems are coming up that will get you in there. I've never had a situation where a buyer didn't move in on time, although sometimes the seller doesn't have his money for a day or two. We look after that problem, okay? Next part is just a few remarks about the other area of our services, and that's in the mortgage contract. Amanda's mortgage company that she owns or whatever has sent over all these mortgage documents.
Give me a year.
Yeah, we hope